Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion on what is a bit of a cloudy afternoon here on Wadawurrung country. So I'd firstly like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, which is the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respect to their elders past and present, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who happen to be joining us live, either on Facebook, LinkedIn or YouTube, or watching on the replay at any point. My guest today is Meredith Castles. Meredith, whose land are you coming in from today?
We've got the land of the Palawa people. Yeah, Lutruwita.
Beautiful, thank you. Now we're obviously talking a topic very close to my heart today, and I've spoken about this topic on this show a couple of times already, and it certainly won't be the last conversation we have about it on this show either. But women in STEM, women and girls, and non-binary and gender diverse people in STEM is obviously our core topic today. Meredith, I'd love to start by getting you to introduce yourself through story. So tell us a little bit about yourself and why you've become this passionate person really working to increase the opportunities for women and girls in STEM.
Cool. Yeah, okay. So I fell into it, but I keep saying that, but that's not really my story at all. It's one of those sort of things where everyone says, "Oh, how did you get into it?" And it's like, well, you're kind of always in it. You've been in it since the start. It is. It's kind of on reflection. You kind of realize that it's kind of been your story. Everyone's story is your story. So that's what you find along the way. So yeah, I kind of. I don't have a linear path into STEM at all. I had an arts background, and when I realized that I was doing science the whole way along, I was basically into science from a kid. I was literally. I just have to give a shout out to the Women in STEM Ambassadors Office who are actually just doing this story this morning on Twitter all over. Go have a look at it. It's so funny. Kids' pictures about getting into STEM. But yeah, so basically, every kid is a scientist. That's the story. So yeah, and there I basically went did some acting and arts and that sort of thing, and then segued into science, and that's where I stayed. But I'm in the design of technology. That's my field. So human computer interaction, and through that, I heard a lot about the problems of especially intersectionality, and never knew what it meant. I kept hearing terms being thrown around, and women in STEM, and women were a minority, and the fact that we didn't do things right and that sort of thing. But it all sort of just, I didn't really know what any of it meant. And then when I started to actually get into the design of technology and started to see the impact of not having proper intersectionality, not having women in STEM, not having disability, people actually properly involving people with disability in design of technology, things like that, as well, the impacts. I literally segued myself into it and went, this has to change. And that's literally been my story up until today. So yeah.
Super, and I love the way you made that reframe at the start. It's true of so many people who are working in the diversity and inclusion space. They get on the show and say that it just happened. They're not quite sure how they got here, but the reality is probably much deeper and more ingrained than that. Just for people watching, if you haven't joined me on this show before, please comments, questions in the chat on whichever platform you're on. And if we can address those questions at the time, we will. If not, we'll get to them afterwards. I'm really interested how you spoke about girls in STEM and that every kid is a scientist. And I really appreciate that and would love us to talk a little bit about why that ends. You know, I think you're right. I've got 2 young kids here, and I think every kid is a scientist, but you see the way they get shaped into thinking otherwise. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think are the key barriers to keep kids interested in STEM, and particularly girls and young gender diverse people?
Definitely. Oh, totally. And I guess one thing I want to address about before I do is that I'm going to say the same thing that you'll hear a lot of, because one of the things that I'm going to say is a barrier is the fatigue over this. Because essentially it's becoming, even if it's educators, they're getting fatigued over hearing about it, even though they shouldn't be. So I guess the issue is that one of the barriers, if you've got fatigue, they're going to stop listening. So I guess that is one of the issues is that they need to kids need to recognize at the time that they can play. If you lose the sense of play, which is what we do to them, not them, they're going to lose that. That's where science comes in. If you lose, I guess people mistake it for the arts and the sciences, that line. And if you remove that line or put that line in place, and show the difference between arts and science, that's where I think you lose it as a kid. I think I'm reflecting on my own path through, but then my brother's also a teacher, and I see it happening as well. He's a high school teacher, but he has a lot of friends that are primary school teachers, and it still happens. So essentially, if you're coming through and you're going to put limitations on kids right from the beginning and literally say, this is how you do, this is the pathway into arts, or this is the pathway into science, that's immediately putting a barrier in their own minds. It's their own path. Whereas if you let them explore, that's where science basically starts. Same with I think any gender diverse, any sort of kid, any sort of kid will start with the kids, any sort of identification, I guess, at any level, any age, letting them explore. That's the whole idea. And again, if you're going to put that barrier in their way early, they'll stop exploring. And I think that's the exploration. I think if we stop the exploration of anything, that's what's going to start the journey to stopping. That's what I always find. And it stops them talking to us as well. That's what I always find as well.
Interesting. I like that. Because you're right, we do that. We particularly do that now. I know many of us and many of the parents that I'm around, actively trying to encourage our girls to go into, to think more about the fact that they can be good at maths and they can be good at science, and that there are career options for them, because we didn't get that. It wasn't what was presented to us. For those of us who did go into STEM, for many of us who did go into STEM, the narrative was, no, there's not actually jobs there for you. And we had to push against that. And so do you think perhaps we are pushing a little bit too far?
I think so. I don't know in terms about the early childhood now, but or parenting that's at all. Definitely won't put my foot in that ring, but definitely in schools and things like that I've seen. That I've witnessed, it still does happen to a point. I mean, every kid is different. We know, but like, if you were like me, I was very detailed orientated. Everything I saw, I remembered. That was just me. But even every comment that someone made, I remembered. So it would all shape me. Whereas some people will just be whatever ducks back. It wasn't for me as a kid. So every kid is different. So I guess remembering that is probably a good thing, and being really careful with what you say and how you say it, I guess. But I guess remembering your limitations, I guess as a teacher, I mean, that's the biggest thing, I guess. And that's, again, what I'm seeing a lot of the pushback now against is, just remembering, like, you guys used to be these kids. Like, go back and remember what it was like and put the exploration back.
Yeah, let them explore. Great, awesome. So shifting forward a little bit into the university sector and what we're seeing around women in STEM, there's obviously been quite a strong focus on women and girls in STEM for, as long as I can remember. Even though we haven't seen a lot of progress, we've certainly been having discussions. I know this is a ridiculously large question and none of us really have the answer to it. Why are we getting nowhere? Why does it feel like we're getting nowhere? It's a fair question, and the fair answer is because we're not really. Look, that's really unfair. In some places we are. I mean, there are definite movements forward. There really are. But we're talking about, I mean, as a whole, people who are not in the university sector, or I guess we're just using university sector, they'll see very slow progress because the progress is being made person by person, not faculty by faculty or school by school or anything like that. And I guess that's not ideal, but again, I guess that's nature, because you're going to turn a person's mind before you're going to turn multiple people's minds. But I guess it keeps going back to the point of why are we continually having to change people's minds? If it's that
continue push back, and having to go and actually make a change in one person's life is great on paper, and it sounds good in a I don't know, romantic comedy. And that's you hear it a lot. It's a great line, but it's not sustainable, I guess, because it's a growing sector. But I guess cultural change takes time. I've literally just come off a program myself it wasn't university, it was TAFE, but similar thing, to literally try and do both at the same time, cultural change and educational change, just to some success. So I guess university sectors need to look at parallel change. Look at, I hate using that. I hate adages of like killing two birds with one stone, but it's true. You literally have to hit multiple levels at once and literally go, guys, this is not something you need to change. It's not something that you need to work towards. It's not something that you need to believe in. It's not a movement. It's the key words that keep getting thrown around, that that we need to work towards these changes and movements. That's what it is. It's not a movement. It's not sister suffragette. It is something that should not even be a question. So yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I really, obviously, for those who are watchers of this show, they'll know that you've touched on something that I find really important, is that shift. And it'd be interesting to explore this, a shift away from person by person type approach. And, commonly I can be a bit harsh when I talk about women in leadership programs or mentoring programs, where the focus is exactly on that. It's taking the existing women who are there, trying to somehow make them better and more visible, and increase their personal and individual career success. And yes, we see that those programs can have success for those individuals who get into that. But to me, that's not how we create organizational change. Did you want to expand a little bit on the types of things that you did in that culture change program that actually look at the organization and then not at the individuals?
Yeah, sure. I will actually say it was trial and error. We waded in and hoped it would work, unfortunately, because it was, again, there wasn't anything to go by. And again, I'll touch on that as well, again, about evaluations of programs, as you mentioned. How do you know what works? Because you don't. You absolutely don't know what works. So we literally had to go, same exactly what you just said. We have no clue what works. We have nothing to go by. Cultural change needs to happen quickly. So we walked in and literally went, okay, we know you need diversity in your businesses. This is ICT, so I should give a bit of background. It's ICT. So one of the, if you haven't been following a lot of the STEM, the STEM, STEM, engineering and technology have been identified as two of the worst, I guess, in terms of statistics of actually getting women involved. And we know that they do want to, statistically, they do want to get, as a sector, more women involved, but they can't. And that's twofold, because women don't want to, because ICT's got such a really bad reputation as a bad employer of women, but also the fact that they are a bad employer of women. So you've got a vicious circle. So we were trying to fix the bad employer of women side as well, and try and find out why. And yeah, you walked in and you went, oh, that's why. It took 5 seconds. Yeah, look, it was walking in and going, you needed the fresh side, the fresh eyes, and literally went, you're not going to attract any women into this particular situation, because one, you're objectifying women the minute we walked in the door. That's that's number one. It really was that bad, and it wasn't individual. It wasn't any pointing the finger at any individual people, anything like that. It was just literally the typical boys' club. it was the epitome of a boys' club, and we went, that's number one problem you're going to have, and that was multiple different places we walked into. It wasn't an attractive place to go to for women, yet they wanted women, so it was again a vicious circle. So we worked on that with them, with the women in the program, and we got women involved in the education, like getting them educated in ICT and educated in what they were about to walk into, and then they helped push the cultural change. And with that, we tried to break the cycle. So we weren't changing the women, we were changing the workplaces with the women.
Interesting.
It was a different way of doing it, because we definitely didn't want the women to change. It wasn't the women, definitely was the workplaces, but we also didn't want the individual people in the workplaces to have to change, but their culture had to. That was definitely the key problem, but they had to want to change. So we had to work out what those issues were and let them fall out, and then that's the second part we haven't worked on yet.
That's fascinating. It's interesting to hear that approach. And the interesting thing when you talk about boys' club, what I hear that phrase more commonly used by the men than the women.
Yes.
Because when you actually take the time to talk to men in male-dominated environments about what they would like to see changed, and the experiences that they're having, many of them will refer to that as being a negative part of their culture and of their workplace, and that that they would like to be empowered to be able to call things out and change the culture themselves. And so, I think your approach is definitely interesting, but also I think that just that piece of engaging with the people who are in that workplace, they're not necessarily happy with the way things are anyway.
No.
And so that can be a way to empower change. What do you think about, and we haven't had no previous conversation today about this, so I'm not sure if you're happy to talk about this or not, but I was wondering about the Sage Athena Swan program, which was where we first met, I think, at a Sage conference a few years ago now. And we've seen, for those who are watching who aren't familiar, it's a program that almost all universities and many research institutes have signed up to now, which is around specifically focusing on gender equity in STEM. And it requires universities to do a pretty detailed research project on their organisations and then create a 4-year action plan. And that all happened, and now the universities are moving into the next stage, which is maybe a little bit complicated and not what we need to talk about here right now. But all that work that was done, and all these applications are visible and public on Science in Australia Gender Equity's website. So you can look them up, which I think they're an incredible source of information for gender equity, not just in STEM, but just more broadly in Australia. They're resources worth reading. What do you think the impact of that program is currently? What are you seeing in terms of, is it effort well spent? Are we seeing some change? Because it really does kind of tackle what we're talking about. It tackles cultural change.
It does.
It tends to.
It does. I can only speak as a peripheral observer, because quite simply, so for everybody else, I'm in Tasmania. We have a single university, University of Tasmania, who we do not participate in the program, and I'll just leave it at that. But I do have a lot of involvement in other universities in Australia, so I can speak as a peripheral observer from other universities. And I've seen some incredible change. The positive change at some of those universities are amazing. And this is just from ICT. I am involved in mostly ICT, but because of the nature of my research in human-computer interaction, it's very multidisciplinary. So I see right across the board. I guess the issue is people are really trying, and I guess it harks back to what you said before. We've been doing this for so long. How long do we have to do it for? But at the same time, is that if it has to be a crawling race, then people are trying, and they are trying really hard, and it's great. But there is also a lot of virtue signaling around. So I have, and this is just from my own observation, it's very much the people who are really trying, really top notch. But there is also there's people that have gotten their bronze or and that sort of thing, or that sort of area, and they've just left it at that. It comes from the top. Unfortunately, we've still got a hierarchical structure in most universities, and if you have the changeovers of vice chancellors and things like that, you have to have it on their agenda. And if it's not on their agenda, what can you do? Unfortunately, that's literally what it comes down to.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to pick up on there, but I know we're running a bit short on time. But I'm interested in that point, because there was a paper released last week. I think you may have seen this as well, because I know we follow some people on Twitter together that spoke about perhaps too much focus has been on the leadership in terms of gender equity. I don't know if
maybe. I think so.
So essentially, the research, their conclusions from the data that they gathered were that perhaps the leadership aren't the best spot to look to in terms of changing culture and shifting gender equity, because many of the leadership actually had apathy around the topic, and so weren't necessarily going to be motivated enough to push change. But I think what you've just described there is exactly why, unfortunately, we have to try and break through that apathy, because you're right. If the head of an organisation as large as a university, and we know what a beast universities are in terms of changing them, but they're already on a track to do something, and the head changes, and all of a sudden we're not focused on that work anymore. I think you've nailed it. I think that leadership is important, and hiring leaders who are 100% committed to this work is important.
Totally.
Peter's just chimed in with something that I think will be close to your heart here, Meredith. PA for arts is missing from STEM, and I believe Peter works in diversity and inclusion now, but I believe his background is in the arts. So I think he's.
I'm with you, Peter. But yeah, I literally had conversations with people about the fact that we're almost going to have to buy a vowel, though. Because I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, arts and sciences, but I wonder whether it's not needed to be included in STEM, because if you I'm gonna annoy so many people with this, but I'm not sure if it actually needs to be actually included in STEM, or whether we just need to include it in the conversations with STEM, because it's just the fact that it's so complementary. I just think that if you put it within STEM, it doesn't become cross-disciplinary anymore, and I think you need STEM to be cross-disciplinary and multidisciplinary to keep it sort of honest. So I like the fact that you can have it separate but together rather than involved. Yeah,
nice reflection. I like that. All right, final thing. I know you have a podcast show, which I think I've got the link to here. Is that it? That's what I call science.
That's the one.
So people can Google that, or go and find it and have a listen. If you right now you're talking to people who are working in diversity and inclusion, in gender equity, probably quite a few today who are interested in STEM specifically, what have you seen as one of the most practical and useful initiatives to really start to shift change in this space?
Oh, I can't plug my own episode. Oh, that's terrible. We've literally. I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah, I should just clarify the fact that I'm not the key host in this show. It's a science podcast, everyone. So we actually have all our co-hosts are all experts in the different STEM fields, and I'm the tech host. But basically, the episode last week, the one just gone, was actually on this program I just talked about, which was the diverse women in ICT program that we just launched and finished. So we actually haven't done one specifically on this topic for a while. So it's actually, that is the latest one, and we reflect on the success with the person who created this entire program. So to answer your question, I really would have plugged that one anyway. So that one. Yeah, last week. It was just called the Women. I don't know what the title was, but something basically designing an women in ICT pathways program.
Yeah. All right. So check that out. And we've just got a final question from Tim before we tip off today. Meredith, did you want to tackle this, or I'm happy to? If you.
Are we seeing an improvement in diversity at university boards? Are we talking about members of the boards? In terms of top boards, I can't answer that because I'm not involved at that level. But in terms of things like, I will say from things like diversity boards and things like that, no. And that's just my experience. We are not seeing diversity on diversity boards. We're not seeing that's a very general comment. I will say that. I can't say that that's all universities, but unfortunately there's too much emphasis on people knowing what's best for other people and towing the company line. That's still unfortunately the issue here. So it still comes down, as Bree said, right from the top. If you don't have that that commitment from the top, then all the boards are not going to be they're not going to be you're not going to have representation on the boards that you need. So unfortunately it's a work in progress there.
Great. Thanks, Meredith. Now we are about to wrap up. Thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, you can follow Meredith on LinkedIn or also on Twitter, which is where I see her posting regularly some really useful content. So jump over to there. Just before we do log off today, I will make a little plug for the Diversity and Inclusion Network, which has its next meeting on Thursday. And so it's quite timely. I always get excited because anytime I actually remember to talk about this network on this show, I then get off this show and somebody has signed up. So I'm looking forward to see who does sign up today. It really is, it's a recognition that diversity and inclusion professionals quite often work in one-person teams and are asked to manage up quite significantly and quite often without the experience or expertise actually delivering change in the diversity and inclusion space. So the network is a space to connect with others who are finding themselves up against the same challenges and really create a team, a network of people who are driving best practice in this space. So if you want to jump on, you can head to the website. I'll stick the banner up here. And you can sign up. If you sign up before Thursday, we'll definitely get you in and you can join in our conversation. One of our main theme for this week is really back to basics. Where do we start? When we're at an organisation that really hasn't done much in this space at all, where do we start? But there's also plenty of other conversations that will happen in the hour for those of you working at a deeper level. So thank you again, Meredith, for coming on, and thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with yet another guest. Please keep sending your guest suggestions through, topic suggestions through. It really helps us plan out the series. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Meredith.
Bye.